Greetings. You're on the Betrayal and Beyond channel. The first official notice didn't come from a lawyer. It came from the board of the company I had built from the ground up. It was a sterile, cautiously worded email informing me that, effective immediately, I was being placed on indefinite administrative leave. The reason cited was a series of serious and disturbing allegations regarding my professional conduct and personal stability, brought forward by my co-founder and wife, Isabel. I read the email 3 times in the sterile silence of my new, soulless bachelor apartment. It felt like a verdict being read for a trial I never knew was happening. 2 weeks prior, Isabel had sat me down in our sun-drenched living room, her eyes filled with what I had mistaken for genuine sorrow, and told me she needed space. She spoke of my intensity, my obsessive work habits, and a growing emotional chasm between us. I was devastated but understanding. I agreed to move out temporarily to give her the space she needed, believing we were working through a rough patch. I was a fool. It wasn't a rough patch. It was a meticulously planned demolition. Her request for space wasn't a plea for healing. It was a strategic maneuver to get me off the board so she could seize the throne. The true scope of her war against me became clear that night. I was searching for a financial document on an old backup hard drive, a shared device we hadn't used in years. As the drive whirred to life, a folder I didn't recognize caught my eye. It was named with a single elegant word, Phoenix. My heart lurched. It was the code name for our very first project, a name only she and I knew, a symbol of our shared dream rising from nothing. Curiosity, tinged with a cold dread, made me click it open. It wasn't a folder of old memories. It was an arsenal. Inside was a subfolder labeled Logbook. I opened a document and found a detailed, day-by-day chronicle of the last 6 months of my life, twisted into a horrifying fiction. Every action I had taken was recorded and reframed through a lens of malice. A night I worked late to meet a deadline was logged as asterisk, chose work over me again. Deliberate emotional abandonment. Asterisk a time I had questioned a risky business expense was recorded as asterisk. I questioned my judgment in front of the team, undermining my authority. Financial control tactics. Asterisk my concern over her growing friendship with a new, slick investor named Julian was twisted into asterisk. Jealousy is becoming paranoid. He is trying to isolate me from my professional network. Asterisk. It was my life, but rewritten by a master propagandist. Then I found the audio files. My stomach turned to ice. She had been secretly recording our conversations. But as I played the clips, I realized it was worse than that. I listened to a recording of what sounded like me, my voice tight with frustration, saying, "Can't believe you would be so reckless. This is everything we've worked for." It sounded damning, like the rantings of an unhinged partner. But I remember that conversation. It was from a month ago. I frantically searched my own phone's voice memos. I often recorded my own thoughts for work and found my recording of that same meeting. I played my version, the full, unedited reality. Her voice came first, calm and goading. Asterisk, it's just a small risk, Arthur. Don't be so dramatic. Asterisk, then my voice, pleading. Asterisk, it's not a small risk, Isabel. It gambles our employees' salaries. Please, just listen to the data. Asterisk, and then her provocation. Asterisk, or maybe you just can't handle it when I have a good idea. Maybe you need to control everything. Asterisk, only then came my frustrated reply. She had surgically removed her own words, editing the conversation to create a recording of my unprovoked rage. She hadn't just logged lies, she was manufacturing evidence. The final folder was labeled The Transition. It contained a detailed business proposal, co-authored by her and Julian. It outlined a plan for the company's future, a future that hinged on invoking the key person risk clause in our partnership agreement to have me declared mentally unfit and removed. It detailed how they would leverage her narrative as a survivor of a toxic partnership to win the sympathy of the board and rally the employees. The final page was a draft of a press release, announcing my departure due to personal health reasons and celebrating Isabel's courageous leadership as she stepped into the role of sole CEO. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating a profound and chilling realization. This was not a personal betrayal that had spilled into our professional lives. This was a professional coup that had used the intimacy of our marriage as its primary weapon. She had poisoned our friends, our employees, and our board of directors with a carefully crafted fiction. She hadn't just left me. She was systematically erasing me, not just from her life, but from the company that had been my life's work. The grief I had been drowning in for 2 weeks evaporated, burned away by a sudden, clarifying heat. It wasn't the heat of rage. It was the cold, white-hot fire of purpose. She thought I was the emotionally volatile one. She thought I would break, that I would yell and scream, and, in doing so, prove her narrative correct. She had miscalculated. She had forgotten that before I was a husband, I was a builder, a strategist who understood that the strongest structures are built on an unshakable foundation. I copied the entire Phoenix folder onto a new, encrypted drive. I had her playbook, her strategy, her weapons. She had built a narrative of lies, a house of cards designed to withstand an emotional storm. But she had no idea what to do against a calm, methodical man armed with the one thing she had completely discarded: the truth. The next morning, I didn't call the board. I didn't text Isabel. I didn't reach out to our bewildered friends. My first call was to a woman named Lena Petrova. Lena wasn't a traditional lawyer. She was a specialist in corporate warfare and reputation management. Her clients weren't grieving spouses. They were executives who had been targeted, sabotaged, and pushed out. She was known for her forensic precision and her utter lack of sentimentality. She was, in short, the perfect general for the war Isabel had declared. I met her in her stark, minimalist office. I didn't give her an emotional, rambling account of my heartbreak. I simply opened my laptop, connected it to her large screen, and played the unedited audio recording of my conversation with Isabel. Then I played Isabel's edited version. I let the two realities hang in the silence of the room. Lena watched, her expression unreadable. When the clips finished, she turned to me, a flicker of something that looked like professional admiration in her sharp eyes. "She's good," Lena said, not with sympathy, but with the detached appreciation of a grandmaster admiring a clever, if treacherous, opening gambit. Amateur audio editing, but the narrative strategy is top tier. She's created a self-contained fiction. Any emotional reaction from you, anger, denial, will be seen as proof of her claims. "So what do?" I asked. "Nothing," Lena replied. "For now, you will not contact her. You will not contact the board. You will not speak to any of your employees. You have been placed on leave. You will respect it. You're now a ghost. While she builds her narrative in the light, we will build our case in the shadows." She thinks this is a PR battle. We're going to treat it like a criminal investigation. For the next 3 weeks, I followed her instructions to the letter. I disappeared. I let Isabel's story marinate, her fiction calcifying into accepted fact within our social and professional circles. It was agonizing. I saw the whispers and the pitying looks when I went to the grocery store. I read the thinly veiled supportive posts for Isabel on social media from our mutual friends. I was a pariah, a villain by popular consensus, and every instinct screamed at me to defend myself, to shout the truth from the rooftops. But I trusted Lena. While I remained a ghost, Lena's team went to work. They were a quiet army of forensic accountants, data recovery specialists, and private investigators. They didn't focus on the emotional drama. They focused on the data trail Isabel and Julian had left behind. They uncovered a shadow correspondence between them, conducted on a private server, detailing their plan to systematically devalue my contributions to the company and exaggerate Isabel's. They found evidence that Julian had been advising Isabel for months on how to leverage the key person clause, long before our marriage had shown any public signs of strain. The emotional chasm she'd tearfully described to me wasn't a discovery. It was a fabrication created to serve a business objective. The forensic accountants found the smoking gun. Isabel had created a shell corporation registered in a different state under her maiden name. Over the past 6 months, she had been diverting small, almost unnoticeable amounts of company funds to this corporation, disguised as payments to a new consultant. It was a slow, methodical embezzlement, a war chest she was building for her new life, funded by the company I had bled for. She wasn't just planning to push me out. She was stealing from our shared creation on her way out the door. While Lena gathered the evidence, my job was to build a different kind of case. Following her advice, I began reaching out to a select few key people who I knew valued integrity over gossip. I didn't call them to complain or to tell my side of the story. I asked for their help with a new venture. I met with our former head of engineering, a brilliant woman Isabel had forced out 6 months prior after a disagreement over project direction. I met with our first ever client, a man who had taken a chance on us when we were just 2 kids with a laptop. I met with a retired board member who had served as my mentor for years. To each of them, I presented a single, undeniable piece of evidence that contradicted Isabel's narrative. To the engineer, I showed the original project specs, proving that her disagreement with Isabel was actually her correct identification of a fatal flaw that Isabel had ignored out of ego. To the client, I showed early email correspondence that proved I was the architect of a strategy that had won them over. I wasn't refuting Isabel's lies about my character. I was reestablishing the objective, verifiable truth of my competence and my history. I wasn't fighting her on her chosen battlefield of emotion. I was creating a new one built on a foundation of fact. The final piece of the puzzle was the upcoming annual shareholders meeting. It was a month away. This, I knew, was Isabel's intended stage. She would use it to cement her power, to formally announce my departure, and to present her new vision for the company, with Julian by her side as a strategic advisor. She would be crowned queen. "She's expecting you to fight the allegations," Lena said as we sat in her office, the mountain of evidence compiled in neat, labeled binders on her conference table. "She's prepared for a legal battle over the partnership agreement. She's not prepared for an insurrection." Lena slid a document across the table. It was a proxy statement. "You are still a majority shareholder, Arthur. You have been silent, but you have not been neutered. We are not going to ask for your job back. We are going to call for a vote of no confidence in the current leadership." The strategy was audacious. It was a corporate coup in reverse. Isabel had used personal lies to gain professional power. We were going to use professional truth to expose her personal deception. I picked up the phone and began making calls to the other major shareholders, not as a spurned husband, but as the founder of the company, armed with an undeniable case of mismanagement, fraud, and a conspiracy to illegally oust a majority partner. The ghost was about to come back and haunt the house he had built. The day of the shareholders' meeting, the atmosphere in the boardroom was electric with tension. I walked in a few minutes before it was scheduled to begin. It was the first time I had set foot in the building in over a month. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. People who had been my colleagues for a decade stared at me as if they were seeing an apparition. Isabel was at the head of the long conference table, flanked by Julian. She looked every bit the part of the courageous new CEO, poised, powerful, dressed in a sharp, dark suit. When she saw me, her mask of composure didn't slip. but I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought I was there to beg, to make a last, desperate, emotional plea. She thought I was walking into her victory celebration. I didn't look at her. I took my seat, a seat that had been reserved for me as a majority shareholder, and placed a single, slim folder in front of me. I nodded to my mentor, the retired board member, who gave me a subtle, reassuring nod in return. The meeting began. The preliminary financials were discussed, and then the chairman, a man who had been thoroughly swayed by Isabel's narrative, cleared his throat. "And now," he said, "we must address the difficult matter of Mr. Arthur Vance's position at this company. In light of recent, deeply concerning events and for the stability of our future, the board has accepted Isabel Croft's recommendation." "I believe you'll find that's no longer the board's decision to make," I said, my voice cutting through his speech. It wasn't loud, but it had the clear, carrying quality of absolute certainty. Every head in the room swiveled towards me. Isabel's eyes narrowed. "Arthur, this is highly inappropriate. This is a closed board matter." "Is it?" I replied, opening my folder. "Because I see a room full of shareholders. And as the founder and holder of 40% of this company's stock, I believe I have the right to address them, especially regarding a conspiracy to commit fraud against them." A shocked murmur went through the room. Julian leaned over and whispered something to Isabel, but she waved him off. "These are baseless, desperate accusations," she said, her voice dripping with dismissive pity. "I understand you're hurting, Arthur, but you cannot bring our personal issues into this boardroom." "You're absolutely right," I said. "Let's keep it professional." I stood up and looked around the room, making eye contact with the shareholders I'd spoken to. "So, let's talk about the unauthorized diversion of company funds to a shell corporation, Isabel Sterling Consulting, LLC. Let's talk about the deliberate doctoring of official meeting records to misrepresent project outcomes. And let's talk about a strategic plan, codenamed Phoenix, which outlines a detailed conspiracy with an external advisor." I paused and looked directly at Julian. "To illegally oust a co-founder for personal financial gain. None of that sounds personal to me. It sounds like gross mismanagement and a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty." I let the words hang in the air. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made an emotional appeal. I had simply stated facts. Lena's associate, a young, sharp-eyed lawyer, chose that moment to enter the room. He walked calmly down the length of the table and placed a thick, spiral-bound dossier in front of the chairman and another in front of the company's general counsel. "That document," I said, "contains the full, unedited evidence for every claim I have just made. Bank records, server logs, sworn affidavits, and the complete, unedited audio recordings. I suggest you review it." Isabel's face was a mask of white-hot fury. The narrative had completely slipped from her grasp. This wasn't a story about a scorned wife anymore. It was about a criminal conspiracy. My retired mentor stood up. "In light of this information," he said, his voice booming with authority, "and as the representative for a consortium of shareholders holding a combined 25% of stock, I am formally calling for a vote of no confidence in the current acting CEO, Isabel Croft, and demanding an immediate, independent forensic audit of this company's finances and records." The room erupted. Isabel tried to regain control, tried to bang the gavel, but it was useless. The power had shifted. The truth, once revealed, was like a chemical reaction that could not be reversed. Julian, ever the opportunist, saw the writing on the wall. He stood up quietly, gathered his papers, and slipped out of the room without a word. He was cutting his losses. Isabel was left alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her own creation. She looked at me, her eyes filled not with sorrow or remorse, but with pure, undiluted hatred. The hatred of a chess master who has just been checkmated in a game she thought she had already won. The vote of no confidence was nearly unanimous. Isabel was immediately removed as CEO. The forensic audit uncovered everything and more. She was forced to resign from the board in disgrace to avoid prosecution. The company paid a hefty settlement to buy out her shares, but her reputation was in ruins. The story of her meticulous, cold-blooded coup became a quiet legend in our industry, a cautionary tale about the difference between ambition and treachery. I was reinstated not just as CEO, but as the undisputed leader of the company I had built. My first act was to bring back the brilliant engineer Isabel had pushed out and to promote the loyal, talented people who had been sidelined during her shadow reign. We rebuilt the company's culture around a single core principle: radical transparency. The duel was over. I had won, but it was a victory that left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had saved my company, and I had cleared my name, but the battle had cost me something I could never get back. I had been forced to see the darkest depths of the person I had once loved more than anything. In the end, I realized the company wasn't my life's work. It was just a company. I spent the next year stabilizing it, putting a new, trustworthy leadership team in place, and then I did something no one expected. I stepped down. I sold a portion of my shares and used the money to start a small foundation that invests in young, ethical entrepreneurs, the kind of people we had been once before the dream got poisoned. My life is quieter now. It's smaller. It's more authentic. I didn't get the dramatic courtroom confession or the tearful apology I probably once craved. I got something better: the quiet, unshakable peace of a man who fought a war he never wanted, and won it not by becoming a monster, but by simply, stubbornly, and relentlessly holding on to the truth. Thank you for listening to this story on betrayal and beyond. What part of this story was the most intense for you? The discovery of the Phoenix folder or the final, calculated takedown in the boardroom? This was a story about a war of narratives, where lies were used as weapons. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to protect your own truth against someone else's fiction? Share your story in the comments below. If this episode moved you, please support us with a like and subscribe for more. And remember, the most powerful response to a lie is not to argue, but to arm yourself with undeniable truth.